Now.
The room had a definite Middle Eastern atmosphere. A high ceiling, no doors, but many curved ornamental archways covered by brocade curtains. Dim lighting from behind Moorish screens, and, of course, the heavy scent of incense. It could have been a setting from a very old Hollywood movie of the Arabian Nights. From behind some heavy drapes, two men moved into the room, moving lightly over the rich Persian carpets.
This is it, all right, Ronnie?
Yes, I think so, George. What an extraordinary setup.
Quite. But you know what we always say. Once a foreigner, always a foreigner.
Well, let's give the place a good going over. You search the desk.
Right. There's nothing much here.
God, it's very encouraging. Hey, look at this.
What is it?
Well, if I didn't know better, I'd say it was an Aladdin's lamp.
You better rub it. It might be able to solve us all this work.
Right, here goes. Bring us luck, eh?
Episode 1 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel embark on the strange case of the fantasy game. The skies over London were dark and filled with rain clouds. A cold wind blew the fine drizzle into deserted thoroughfares and empty alleyways. It was not a night to be out, and few people were. Big Ben sonorously chimed midnight. Half a mile away, the sound floated unnoticed through the ornate Arabian apartment where the two agents, Ronnie Westcott and George Reed, recoiled in amazement from the vivid flash of light that lit up the whole room. They gasped as smoke filled one corner, and out of it stepped a shadowy figure in flowing robes. As the haze cleared, both men saw the snout of a Sten gun leveled towards them.
No! No!
George Reed was mowed down by a hail of bullets. Ronnie Westcott, who was closer to the arched entrance, sprinted through the velvet drapes as the Sten gun swung round on him. The figure ran forward in pursuit, firing all the time. When it reached the passageway, there was no sign of Ronnie. The man paused, crouched to the ground, wiped his hand on the carpet and brought it up sticky with blood. Clearly, Ronnie was hit. The man smiled cruelly and turned back into the room, standing over the body of George Reed with great satisfaction. The rain continued to fall over London for the next 2 or 3 hours. Then the wind changed. The clouds disappeared, and by dawn it was dry and pleasant and far warmer. Across Hampstead Heath that morning came the sound of a woman's laughter. They'd been to a party which had lasted far longer than they'd anticipated.
Oh, top of the morning to you, Mrs. Beale.
And a very good morning to you, Steed. If the morning's as fun as the night was, we should have a good day ahead.
Right. Nothing like an early morning walk to start things off.
Or finish things up.
Coffee at my place, I think.
Splendid suggestion.
Good. Step out then, Mrs. Beale. Step out.
A short while later, at the entrance to Steed's apartment...
I'll make the coffee.
Hello. Oh! Umbrella stand right across the hall. Well, up with it. Right. I'll attend to the bacon and eggs.
Oh, 2 eggs for me, sunny side up. And I think I'd...
What the devil's happened here?
Steed looked around him. 2 pictures on the walls were hanging awry. A third was knocked to the floor. A small table lay on its side, surrounded by broken glasses.
You weren't expecting visitors, were you, Steed?
Steed didn't reply, but moved to the kitchen to check the state of affairs there and in the other rooms. Mrs. Peel, looking around, found a mark on the wall almost hidden by the settee. The mark was blood, a stark red handprint. She knelt to examine it, and a second print lower down. As she stretched out her hand...
Please. Oh, no.
A blood-stained hand reached to Mrs. Peel's. Ronnie Westcott was lying behind the settee, his eyes staring upwards in a glazed manner. The other hand was clutched to his chest, wet with blood.
Mrs. Peel? Mrs. Peel, what is it? Oh, Ronnie. Bloody Westcott.
I'll phone for a doctor.
No. No, mustn't leave out. Top security. I'm finished anyway. No, doctor.
How did this feel?
Steed, listen carefully. George, Reed, myself, we stumbled onto something big, important, full story in George's rooms. Evidence.
Where is George?
George is dead.
Who did this, Ronnie? Who was it?
Jeannie.
Jeannie who? Who is she?
Honey. Beware. Steed up.
Ronnie Westcott. He's one of the best undercover men in the business. Was.
Steed? Steed, what did he say?
Something about a woman named Jeannie. A good-looking woman. He said she was a honey. Well, call MI5, Mrs. Beale. Q Division Colonel Robertson. Tell him what's happened. He'll arrange to have Ronnie collected quietly without any fuss.
Where will you be?
He said there was a full report of all this in George's room. I'm going to collect it.
George Reed's dead body still lay where it had fallen hours before. The tapestries at the far end of the Arabian room were parted. A powerful-looking Turkish man entered, expensively, immaculately dressed. The robed assassin led him across to where the dead man lay.
There, Mr. Arkadi. This is the man, and this is his wallet.
George Reed. You say the other one got away, Vincent?
Yes, but he was hit. I didn't miss him. He can't live long.
I trust not. It is a pity you allowed him to escape. The thing to do now is cover all traces. I will attend to this one. An address. The address on this card from the wallet. You see what you can find.
Yes, very well, Mr.
And, Vincent, whatever you find, destroy it.
George Reed, the late George Reed, lived in rooms in North London. John Steed knew where they were and drove over, but he was just a little late. The man Vincent got there ahead of him. He had shed his conspicuous robes, and he was dressed all in black. A sinister, slight figure who moved with assurance to the front door of the apartments. Working skillfully at the lock, he was soon inside.
George Reed. So this is where he lived.
There were two rooms, a bed-sitting room and a smaller one that Reed must have used as a study. Vincent chose the latter, moved first to the desk, pulling out the drawers, rummaging through their contents. Breaking into the locked drawer ruthlessly, he found a metal waste-paper basket and began filling it with papers from the locked drawer. Then he moved to the filing cabinet. It was, of course, locked, but that didn't present any problems.
Easy. It must be in here. Yes, the file. The file marked QQF. Yes, all this must go.
Vincent tipped the contents into the wastepaper basket and lit a match. He watched the flames devour the papers with satisfaction. When the last one had curled into a charred brown wafer, he took a ruler from the desk and stirred the ashes. Satisfied that no one could restore the contents, he moved towards the door. It was then that John Steed entered. Vincent quickly moved into the protection of a large cupboard that stood near the door. Steed entered cautiously and was immediately aware of the smell of burning. He looked around, spotted the wastepaper basket, and moved over to it. Vincent, in the shadows, drew from his belt a long, oriental dagger. Steed touched the wastepaper basket and recoiled from the heat just as Vincent lunged forward. The knife came down, but Steed had moved sideways. The knife ripped his coat. Steed grabbed at the knife hand just in time. The two men grappled. Steed found himself staring at the stockinged mask. With a vicious twist, Vincent stabbed again, but Steed was prepared this time. The knife fell to the floor. Vincent got a better grip and tripped Steed, who fell back against the cabinet. Vincent moved in, but Steed bounced back from the cabinet, knocked Vincent sideways. Steed got a hold and with one swift movement threw Vincent over his head towards the window. The effort made Steed fall to his knees, but by the time he'd scrambled to his feet and made for the window, Vincent had picked himself up and was running down the alleyway. Steed paused, realized pursuit was impossible, and picked up the knife from the carpet.
Well, this should be useful. Definitely not made in Sheffield.
Steed placed the knife on the desk and inspected the filing cabinet and the wastepaper basket. It was clear that Vincent had done a good job on getting rid of everything Steed was looking for. Finally, Steed moved over to the tall cupboard by the door.
What the devil? Cupboard filled with dozens of jars, all marked Best British Honey. Well, this can't be for real.
In Steed's apartment, Mrs. Peel waited patiently. Eventually, the doorbell rang.
Ah, Steed's forgotten his key. Not again.
It was the postman.
Morning, miss. Register package. Just sign out, will you?
Oh, right. Thank you.
Thank you, miss.
Mrs. Peel moved back into the room. Ronnie Westcott's body had been removed, but she still glanced with apprehension towards the spot behind the settee. She sat down on the settee and studied the parcel, turning it over in her hands. On the back was a label. Mrs. Peel read,
B. Bumble and Company. A gift from George Reed. Best British Honey. Now, what the devil does that mean?
What indeed? Now, Mrs. Peel was in John Steed's apartment that morning when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Peel opened the door to find herself staring at the postman.
Morning, miss. Registered parcel. Just sign out, will you, please?
Certainly. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you, miss.
Mrs. Peel moved back into the room. Ronnie Westcott's body had been removed from behind the settee. Mrs. Peel sat down and studied the parcel. On the back was a label. She read,
B. Bumble and Company. A gift from George Reed. Best British Honey. Now, what the devil does that mean?
Episode 2 of this story, in which Emma Peel has a taste of honey, and John Steed finds himself playing the opening moves of The Fantasy Game. John Steed and Emma Peel, returning to Steed's apartment after a quite splendid all-night party, found a dying undercover agent, Ronnie Westcott, lying behind the settee. Before he died, Ronnie managed to gasp out the fact that his fellow agent, George Reed, had been killed. He muttered something about genie and honey, and the fact that full information could be found in George Reed's rooms. Steed had gone to the rooms and been attacked by a man in a stocking mask. In the following fight, the man had got away after Steed had thrown him through the window and left Steed with a curious oriental dagger. Steed, upon searching the rooms, realized that all the important information had been destroyed. He'd also discovered a cupboard filled with jars of honey, all similarly marked Best British Honey, just like the package Mrs. Peel was holding.
Now, why the devil should George Reed send Steed a jar of honey? Hello?
Glad to know, Mrs. Peel.
What's the news, Steed?
Someone beat me to George Reed's rooms. Nasty creature wearing a mask and suffering from halitosis. Just as well he was wearing the mask, really. He got away leaving me with a ripped jacket and a curious dagger.
What about all the gin that the two agents had collected?
All burned.
So we don't know what they were onto.
Not at the moment. Reed seems to have had a bit of a sweet tooth. He's got a whole cupboard filled with jars of honey.
Honey? Steed, you've just had a parcel through the post. It's a jar of honey sent by George Reed.
What? Well, that settles it. Ronnie Westcott said the word honey before he died. And there could be something contained in these jars. I'd better go through them all. It'll be a long job.
Right. I'll pay a visit to B. Bumble and Company, makers of Best British Honey. Be a busy bee, Steed, won't you? Bye-bye.
The Turkish gentleman, who was known as Arkadi, was a health fiend and spent a considerable number of hours in the local health centre. He was there, concealed to his neck in a steam box, when Vincent reported his recent encounter with Steed.
So you left him there. That was very foolish, Vincent, very foolish. Now grab that towel and wipe my forehead.
Yes, of course. But I did destroy the files, Mr. Arkadi.
Nevertheless, there may be a general hue and cry. We must continue to cover all traces.
Yes, Mr. Arkadi.
The honey shop, Bernie.
Yes, sir.
Now go with Vincent. Vincent, take Bernie with you. You seem unable to look after yourself. Now take him and go to the honey shop. Check up there. You know what you have to do.
Yes, Mr.
And
Arkadi.
don't fail this time. And tell them to get me out of this sweatbox, please, now.
So, both Mrs. Peel and the opposition both made their way to the curious establishment of B. Bumble & Co. Outside the building hung the sign, "Homemade honey from hilariously happy hives." Mrs. Peel raised an exquisitely curved eyebrow. Her lips twitched into a smile as she opened the door.
Anyone at home? Obviously no one in the hive.
Who's there? Who's there? Good morning, dear lady, good morning.
Good morning.
Mrs. Peel found herself confronted by a rotund, cheerful little man who wore a beekeeper's hat with a veil and a long white coat.
Oh, forgive me. I've been attending to my little charges, my bees, buzzing round their hives, so to speak.
Must be exhausting work.
Oh, but rewarding, you know. Yes, rewarding. I'm Bumble, Bee Bumble, always at your service.
Oh?
Yes, indeed, most rewarding. I treat my little bees like little children, for after all, happy bees make bumble honey. Now, dear lady, what can I do for you?
Well, I'd like to send some honey to a friend. Can you arrange that?
But of course. That's what we're here for. Yes, indeed I can. Bumble's honey encircles the globe. Syrup in Sweden, nectar in Nyasaland, honey in the Himalayas. You just give me the address, and I'll dispatch it post-haste. How much do you wish to send?
Just a jar or two.
Of which particular kind? You see, our six-legged friends are very versatile. I have 365 different kinds of honey. Just imagine. Breakfast toast for a whole year, and never the same flavor twice.
Except in leap year.
Oh, quite so.
Well, I thought this would be rather nice.
Mrs. Peel produced the honey jar sent to Steed by post. She handed it to Bumble, who peered at it short-sightedly.
Yes.
It was at this point the shop door opened. Vincent and Bernie entered.
Oh, I'll be with you soon. Won't keep you a moment, gentlemen. Now, let me see. Yes, strength 3, pure syrup without wax. 2 jars, you said. Well, now, if you'll just put the address on these labels...
Yes, of course. That jar was sent to me by a friend of mine, a Mr. George Reed.
Vincent, who had been studying bottles of honey on various shelves, immediately took notice.
Perhaps you know him. Mr. George Reed?
Reed. Oh, no, dear lady, I'm sure you'll understand. We get so many customers, you know, so many.
But this was sent only the day before yesterday. The postmark on the package said...
Oh, a day before yesterday. Well, in that case, of course, I wouldn't remember him. And you, dear lady, must be mistaken.
But I'm not. I can't be.
Oh, but you are. The day before yesterday, I was at the Bahrainian embassy, making a personal delivery of my delicious honey. And this shop, dear lady, was shut.
Are you sure?
Of course I'm sure. Now, will that be all?
Yes, thank you. You will see that the honey is dispatched right away, won't you?
Oh, of course. With Bumble, there's never a fumble. Never fear, dear lady, never fear.
I'll try not to.
Granny, follow her. Follow the girl. You know what to do.
Right.
And now, dear sir, what can I do for...
Just keep quiet to start with.
Vincent pointed the muzzle of his gun into the short, fat man's stomach.
Get behind the counter. Quick. Come on, move.
Poor old Steed. He'd been investigating the contents of those honey jars for hours. He was still clad in the dinner jacket from the party of the night before. Lots of empty jars surrounded him as he pitched yet another quantity of honey down the sink in George Reed's kitchen. The telephone rang. Steed resisted the desire to wipe his fingers on his torn jacket. He licked them instead and headed for the phone.
Hello?
Hello. Is that Mr. Reed? Mr. George Reed?
Speaking. Who is this?
We haven't actually met, but I am Ponsonby Hopkirk. Ponsonby Hopkirk of QQF.
Yeah.
I understand that you made an appointment to see me at the QQF this morning. Well, I wonder if you'd mind making it a bit later. Say 12 o'clock. Would that be all right?
Yes. Perfectly.
Good. I see you later then.
Mr. Hopkirk, this is silly of me, but the QQF, I've quite forgotten the address.
Beaver Street, Mr. Steed. 10 Beaver Street.
Yes, I know, but, hello? Are you there? Hello? The QQF? Beaver Street?
Beaver Street is in Westminster, a short street leading down to the Thames. Steed had little difficulty in finding it. He parked outside, and slipping his overcoat over the torn dinner jacket, he approached a door which read, "The QQF Inc. Knock and enter." Steed did so. Steed found himself in the passageway leading to the Arabian room. Soft carpets clung to the walls, tapestries draped them, and there was the heavy smell of incense.
Back in the Middle East after all these years. And the difference is that it's so badly lit. Not even a red light inside. Oh, well.
Steed moved forward, and pushing aside the drape over the archway, entered the main room. It appeared to be empty. A dry cough from behind a Moorish screen made him swing round.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I was looking for a Mr. Hopkirk.
I am Napoleon. At least that is whom I'm about to become. Please do not disturb me.
Steed, peering through the gloom, saw the reclining figure of a man dressed as Napoleon lying on a divan. Steed approached.
Look, I'm terribly sorry about that retreat from Moscow, and I don't wish to disturb your dreams about Josephine, but I am still looking for Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk. Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk of the QQF?
Did I hear my name mentioned? Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk. Mr. Reed, isn't it? Mr. George Reed.
Yes, that is...
yes. Let me take you by the hand, Mr. Reed.
Well, if you insist.
Welcome to the QQF. Doubly welcome. You're not in a great hurry, are you? You'll wait. You'd like tea, coffee, perhaps, or a drink?
A drink.
Right away.
Ponsonby Hopkirk reached out a hand and took up what appeared to be a replica of an Aladdin's lamp. He rubbed it suddenly.
Hey, presto, open sesame and all those camp sayings. Look!
Steed looked. Appearing through the haze of smoke stepped an attractive, scantily dressed young lady. She advanced towards him.
Would you like something?
How do you like my little genie?
Genie?
A service with a smile, eh? We live up to our name. QQF. Quite fantastic. We live out everyone's fantasies for them, and so relieve the emotional tensions. Tell me, are there any fantasies we can do for you?
Well, at the moment, I think I've got my brain full. Do you mind if I sit down and think all this out, Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk?
No. Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk reached out a hand and took up what appeared to be a replica of an Aladdin's lamp. He rubbed it suddenly.
Hey, presto. Open sesame. Look.
Steed looked. Appearing through the misty haze caused by the slight explosion appeared a scantily dressed, very attractive young woman. She walked towards Steed and said,
You want something?
Well,
How do you like my little genie?
Genie?
Service with a smile, eh? We live up to our name. QQF. Quite fantastic. We live out everyone's fantasies for them, and so relieve the emotional tensions. Tell me, are there any fantasies we can do for you?
episode 3 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel experience even more trouble with various people who are intent on playing the fantasy game. John Steed and Emma Peel, investigating the deaths of 2 top undercover agents, had worked upon 2 clues. One was given to Steed when a gentleman who called himself Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk phoned George Reed's rooms. Steed had been searching them and had answered the phone, pretending to be George. Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk said he was from an organization known as QQF, and Steed made an appointment, as George Reed, to call upon him. Steed had left Mrs. Peel to follow up on another clue, which was a jar of honey. Mrs. Peel had called it Bee Bumbles, the makers of the honey, and had a most interesting talk to Mr. Bumble himself. While she was in his shop, Vincent and Bernie, Mr. Arkadi's henchmen, had arrived. Vincent stayed in the shop, but sent Bernie to follow Mrs. Peel. Later, he reported to Arkadi, who was, about his usual business, looking after his health. He was in the health centre, lying face downwards, on a warm marble slab, being given a massage.
Good. Good, Vincent. So you took care of everything at the honey shop.
Oh, yes, there was nothing you need worry about there, Mr. Arkadi.
You mentioned that you sent Bernie off after the woman who called while you were in the shop.
Yeah, well, she was there when we arrived. I heard her mention the name George Reed, so I thought she might be dangerous. You know, someone checking up.
You don't know her name?
No, but I thought it best to send Bernie off to her.
Perfectly correct procedure, Vincent.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Arkadi.
Bernie knows what to do, I presume.
Oh, yes, Mr. Arkadi. Bernie knows what to do, all right, never fear.
Bernie followed Mrs. Peel, who made her way back to John Steed's apartment. She'd just got in and was checking the postmark on the package of honey that had been sent to Steed when the doorbell rang.
Now, who the devil's that? Steed back? Oh, surely not.
Bernie stood in the doorway. He was holding his hat deferentially in front of him. There was a menacing silence. Bernie said,
Good day. May I come in for a minute?
Mrs. Peel looked at him, sensed something very wrong, and jumped aside just as Bernie fired through the hat, missed Mrs. Peel by inches. She grabbed the door and swung it back on his hand. Bernie leapt forward. Mrs. Peel chopped at his gun hand. The gun went off again. Mrs. Peel closed in, fighting for her life. She couldn't make him drop the gun. All she could do was prevent him from turning it upon her. He was strong, too strong for Mrs. Peel. She changed her tactics, let go of the gun arm, and seized the other one. She gave a terrific throw, and Irish whipped him sideways across the room. He hurtled across a table and crashed into the wall. Mrs. Peel hurried over to where Bernie lay on the floor. She turned him over. His eyes gazed up, staring but sightless. He still held the gun, crooked back against his chest. There was a small hole in his coat. A red stain seeped across his shirt. He was dead. Meanwhile, John Steed sat in the Arabian room of QQF, waiting his turn to be interviewed by Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk. Next to him, a gentleman dressed as Napoleon sat sullen and silent. The curtains parted. Hopkirk fussed his way into the room, ushering a man in mountaineering dress in front of him.
Goodbye, Sir Hilary, for another week. We'll get to the top next week. Meanwhile, I think you've done awfully well to ever reach the South Col. Goodbye. Now, who's next? Yes, you, sir. Napoleon. Come, everything is ready for you. Wellington is just getting his boots on. It's the far room on the right. Look for the sign saying Waterloo.
Napoleon got up, thrust one hand into the front of his coat, and marched off without a word. Hopkirk turned to Steed.
Now, Mr. Reed, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting, but it's been so busy here today. 4 men who wanted to be cowboys, can you imagine? Some people never grow up. We had to stage the gunfight at the old corral in order to satisfy them. Oh, such a production, I assure you. Everyone wants to be ambushed. But now, I can give you my undivided attention. So tell me, what can QQF do for you?
Well, firstly, I'd like to know a little more of what it's all about.
Oh, you haven't received our literature? Our advertising handouts?
I'm afraid not.
Oh, dear, how very remiss of me. Well, then, the QQF is the Quite Fantastic Incorporated. We help you to satisfy your innermost repressed desires. All of us are dreamers, you know. We indulge in fantasies such as what I would do if I won the Irish sweep, what it would be like to spend an hour or so with Brigitte Bardot. Oh, all very healthy. But some people find it hard to get rid of their fantasies in action. They become repressed and subsequently depressed. We, in a nutshell, Mr. Reed, create the fantasies and let you live them, getting rid of all those nasty repressions. Would you like some honeyed crumpets and a pot of tea?
Honey?
Or jam, or treacle?
No, thank you, no.
Oh, it all began with the Arabian Nights, you know.
What did?
The QQF. Yes. As a boy, I was fascinated by the tales of the Arabian Nights. I would dream of living in that exotic era. Then one day I thought, well, why dream? Why not make my dream a reality?
I see.
After that, it was easy. I created this place. Oh, it was a matter of the right decor, the right atmosphere, plus a few tricks. This Aladdin's lamp, for instance.
Hopkirk picked up the lamp and waved it under Steed's nose.
Rubbing it sets up an electronic impulse that rings a bell in the cellar. My little genie then pops up through a trapdoor in the floor. Oh, just a theatrical trick, but a very effective one, don't you think?
Very.
Then I started to think of the commercial possibilities, creating other people's dreams and fantasies. And so QQF was born.
I see.
Within these portals, Mr. Reed, you can stand beside Nelson at Trafalgar, fight with General Custer, become Genghis Khan, a Roman emperor, a world heavyweight champion of the world. 1 million fantasies can be created with a few simple tricks, such as you have already seen.
I don't care if it actually happened or not. I'm not taking any more, I tell you. Let them march on their stomachs as much as they like. I'm leaving. Goodbye, Mr. Hopkirk.
The man who was dressed as Napoleon stomped through the Arabian room, his face blackened, one sleeve of his jacket missing, the sole of one boot split and flapping, and an enormous hole through his hat.
Goodbye, Mr. Napoleon. Don't worry, better luck next time. Now, Mr. Reed, your own fantasy. Could I suggest an intrepid trapper? Or a cavalryman at Balaclava? Aha. I see you wear a dinner jacket in the daytime. Do I detect a suppressed desire to be a band leader, perhaps?
Not really, no.
You wish to break the bank at Monte Carlo? Or, got it. You want to be a secret agent.
Steed gave Hopkirk a keen look. Think you're being sent up, Steed?
Yes, indeed. Ideal for you. Licensed to kill. Pitting your wits against a diabolical mastermind. Make a nice change from your everyday humdrum existence, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yes, certainly make a change.
But no doubt you have a little fantasy of your own. What do you find attractive?
Well, I quite like that bit about an hour with Brigitte Bardot, but, well, actually, I think I'd like the same as Ronnie Westcott.
Eh?
Ronald Westcott. Well, he is a client of yours, isn't he?
Westcott? Ronnie Westcott? Oh, yes, but I hardly think
you did create a fantasy for him, didn't you?
Well, I was working on it, yes, but I wouldn't have thought it was you.
Oh, come now, if it was good enough for Ronnie...
Well, all right. I'll let you know when it's arranged. I can't say how long it will take, but I'll be in touch when it's ready.
Fine. Thank you so much. I'll be getting along then. Oh, by the way, what is it? The fantasy, I mean, what am I to be?
Oh, chief eunuch in a harem.
Brigitte Bardot's no good to you now, Steed. Steed went home rather quickly, and who could blame him? He still looked a little stunned as he entered his apartment and made for the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a large drink. It was then that he noticed a pair of legs sticking out from behind the settee. Sighing impatiently, he picked up the phone and put through a call.
Hello? Hello, Q Division? Is that Colonel Robertson? Steed here. Yeah, look, Colonel, didn't Mrs. Peel tell you about the body in my flat? She did? Well, look, would you mind having it removed right away, please? Yeah, but it's very untidy, and I don't know what the cleaning woman will think when she... What's that? You already have? Well, hold on.
Steed peered over the back of the settee at Bernie.
Oh, My apologies, Colonel. No, it's another body entirely. Yes, a different one. Well, Colonel, I have absolutely no control what happens here while I'm out. No, I am not trying to corner the market. And furthermore,
But the line went dead.
Everything's dead. Except Ponsonby Hopkirk's fantasy. They're far too much alive for my liking. Murder, mayhem, corpses littering the living room. I've got a distinct feeling that this is going to be one of those days.
Now, John Steed stood in his apartment, staring down at the body behind the settee.
Murder, mayhem, and mystery. Go out, leaving one body behind there, and come back to find another in its place. Corpses littering the living room. I don't know what the whole place is coming to.
Steed poured himself a large drink, and it was then that he noticed his tape recorder was open. There was a message scrawled on it. It read,
"Play me, please."
And so Steed did. And Emma Peel's voice said,
Steed, sorry about the body, but he was too big to sweep under the carpet. Nothing on him to identify him, but I saw him earlier at B. Bumble and Company. That's the honey shop, by the way. I'll tell you about it later. Must buzz back to bumblebees. Bye for now.
Episode 4 of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel realize that a plot to assassinate a crown prince is part of the fantasy game. John Steed, pretending to be the dead undercover agent George Reed, had kept his appointment with Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk and found that QQF stood for quite fantastic, an organization that more than lived up to its name. It was Hopkirk's own brainchild, an establishment where people could get rid of their inhibitions by acting out their fantasies. Steed had seen a mountaineer who wished to be Sir Edmund Hillary and a quaint gentleman who wished to be Napoleon. Steed had got away from the place before getting too involved, and returning to his own apartment had found the body of Ronnie Westcott had been taken away as arranged, but in its place lay another dead man. His name was, or rather had been, Bernie, and he'd followed Mrs. Peel back there after overhearing her conversation with Mr. Bumble in the honey shop. In the life-and-death struggle that followed his attempt to shoot Mrs. Peel had lived and Bernie had died. And Mrs. Peel, as she told Steed on the tape, had gone back to Bumble's.
Hello? Hello, Mr. Bumble? Mr. Bumble? Oh, there you are, Mr. Bumble. I wonder if you could tell...
Mrs. Peel walked across the shop to the counter. Bumble sat behind it, propped up on his elbows, apparently dozing.
Mr. Bumble?
He was dead. Mrs. Peel was about to move away when she noticed a scrap of paper by the body. She picked it up and looked at it. It was headed...
Application form, the QQF Incorporated, 10 Beaver Street, name Vincent East. Worth a try, I suppose.
Vincent East, whose application form now rested in Mrs. Peel's handbag, was reporting back to his boss, Arkadi, who was sitting on a couch in the health centre manicuring his nails.
My dear Vincent, now what has happened to Bernie?
I don't know, Mr. Arkady. He's been gone a number of hours. He should have reported back by now. Well, he ought to have.
Ought? It would have been better if you attended to the girl yourself, Vincent.
Yes, Mr. Arkady, but you said that...
We'll give him 1 hour, no more. Then we must presume the worst and take the necessary action.
Yes, Mr. Arkady. The QQF.
You are due there soon, are you not? Make haste then, Vincent, make haste. You mustn't miss your third fantasy, must do.
Mrs. Peel had no difficulty in finding the QQF, and pretending to be a newspaper woman, she quickly got in to see Mr. Hopkirk, who immediately outlined the function of the organization to her. Mrs. Peel listened in fascination.
Specific cases, you say? Well, I suppose my most ambitious fantasy to date was the sinking of the Titanic. Several of my staff had to be resuscitated afterwards.
Any failures?
Oh, never. Although the Titanic was nearly sabotaged by an elderly actress who claimed to have been in cavalcade and said Noel Clouds was far more satisfying, I ask you. Of course, my list of successes is enormous. Hannibal crossing the Alps, and very many assassinations, riding as Derby winner.
Assassinations?
Yes, we've had several of those. Very difficult, some of them.
Well, how can you go about an assassination? For our readers.
Well, first our client selects his victim. A VIP, perhaps, or an important businessman. Then we arm our client with this.
Hopkirk produced an automatic with a long snout and a telescopic sight on top.
Then we put him in a position to use it. We allow him to actually get his victim in his sights. And then...
Then?
Hopkirk brought the gun round to face Mrs. Peel. He pulled the trigger.
Then he has a fine photograph to commemorate the occasion.
Oh, I see. A camera gun.
Correct. It helps the client to get a great deal out of his system, and no one gets hurt. I can't tell you the number of mothers-in-law who've been harmlessly disposed of in this way.
I see. Now, Mr. Hopkirk, if I could know a bit more about your clients.
Clients?
Yes. Vincent East, for instance. I understand he is a client of yours.
Mrs. Peel, I regret that I am unable to discuss individuals. The ethics of my business, you understand. My lips are sealed.
Oh, but surely...
No. I must insist. It would be a betrayal.
Well, thank you anyway. Goodbye.
It's been a pleasure, Mrs. Peel. And if you should ever wish to join QQF, a fantasy, perhaps?
Thank you, Mr. Hopkirk, but I haven't yet exhausted reality. Goodbye.
As Mrs. Peel made her way out of one exit, a harem girl, working as an usherette, showed Vincent East in through another draped archway. Hopkirk immediately stepped forward.
Ah, Mr. Vincent, are we ready for our third fantasy? In a very nice, murderous mood? Today, I hope.
In the health centre, some time later, Mr. Arkadi was having his neck massaged by a very attractive young blonde.
A little lower down, more to the right shoulder. That's it. That's beautiful. Now, you pass the telephone, please.
The girl left off massaging. Arkadi put through a call. The girl resumed the massage. Arkadi eventually got through.
QQF. May I speak, please, to Mr. Vincent East? Thank you. Yes, that feels easier. Now the left shoulder. That's it. Oh, hello, Vincent. Bad news. Bernie has not returned. It's over an hour. Well, of course I know what it means. Yeah, it's an awful blow, I know. But you will have to kill Hopkirk. Goodbye.
Mrs. Peel returned to John Steed's apartment and this time found him at home. Steed had changed his clothes, but his mood still remained gloomy.
Mrs. Peel, we're getting nowhere fast. Westcott, Reed, man behind the settee.
And poor old Bumble. Where the devil does the honey fit in?
I'm down if I know. Went through all the jars in George Reed's cupboard, and there's nothing concealed in any of them.
Yet honey's got something to do with it.
Well, it's a sticky business altogether.
I mean, there must be a link somewhere. Why else would George Reed have sent you a jar?
I don't know, but one thing's for certain. Reed and Westcott weren't killed for jars of honey.
And then there's the QQF.
Yes, quite fantastic. We both had a go, and neither of us got very far there, did we? So why Ronnie signed on there came as a bit of a surprise. I can understand the harem bit. The other, to want to be that is a fantasy in itself.
Harem?
Yes, the part of the fantasy that Ronnie ordered.
Harem? Wait a minute. Bumble said something about the Bahrainian embassy. He made a delivery there. Bahrainian embassy harem.
Bahrainian embassy harem. 2 agents dead.
Mm-hmm.
You thinking what I'm thinking, Mrs. Peel?
Where's the newspaper, Steve?
There, on the side table. No chance to read it yet.
I'll get it. Gin prices to rise sharply. Mother won't like that.
Radio serial, disturbing influence. I'm not mad about that either.
Ah, here we are. Strict security arrangements at the Bahrainian embassy. Crown Prince Ali arrives today. Steed? Hopkirk told me he often had to dream up an assassination.
Come on, Mrs. Peel.
And in the Arabian room at QQF, Hopkirk was not only holding the floor, he was pacing it.
Now, Mr. Vincent, let us rehearse it just once again.
Oh, if you insist.
Now, I am the Crown Prince Ali, and you, the murderer, are concealed, say, here. Now, come along.
Oh, very well.
You don't sound very enthusiastic, and we must have enthusiasm. Now, I am perhaps enjoying a quiet smoke.
Hopkirk picked up a hookah and began to draw the smoke through the long, flexible tube. The water in the bowl of the vase bubbled gently.
Now, you have not revealed yourself yet. The moment of surprise has yet to come. You hold your gun at the ready. The gun, Vincent. The gun on the table.
Vincent picked up the camera gun, and when Hopkirk half turned away, placed it back on the table and took a real gun from his belt.
Now then, choose your moment. And well. Then up you pop. Now.
Right.
No, man. You're not putting enough into it. You won't get any satisfaction out of your fantasy unless you put something into it. Think murderously. Lift the gun a little bit higher. Your whole expression is too bland, too unconvincing for words. You wouldn't frighten a fly off the wall. Now fix me with your eye and think to yourself, I am going to kill him. I am going to kill him. Ah, much better. Much more realistic.
Vincent didn't even look at Hopkirk. He moved swiftly to the table and picked up the top file.
QQF Incorporated. Fantasy number 3. Subject, assassination of the Crown Prince Ali of Bahrain. Thank you, Mr. Hopkirk. Thank you for planning it all so nicely. Don't worry. I'll see it's all carried out to the letter.
Now, in the Arabian room of QQF Incorporated, Ponsonby Hopkirk was instructing his client, Vincent East.
No, man. You're not putting enough into it. How can you get any satisfaction out of your fantasy unless you really believe in it? Now think properly, murderously. Lift the camera gun a little higher. Oh, it's still not very good. You won't get anywhere unless you concentrate. Now fix me with your eye and think. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him. Ah, much better. Much more realistic.
Vincent didn't even bother to look at Hopkirk. He crossed over to the table and picked up the top file.
QQF Incorporated. Fantasy number 3. Subject, the assassination of the Crown Prince of Bahrain. Well, thank you, Mr. Hopkirk. Thank you for planning it all so nicely. Well, don't worry. I'll see that it's all carried out to the letter.
Episode 5 of this story, in which Emma Peel ponders over the assassination plot thought out by QQF, and John Steed gets to meet Prince Ali, the proposed victim of the fantasy game. John Steed and Emma Peel had held a council of war in Steed's apartment, trying to work out not who had committed 3 murders, but why. It wasn't until they'd pooled their knowledge regarding their separate visits to quite fantastic ink that they suddenly had an idea. The Crown Prince Ali of Bahrain was visiting Britain, and strict security precautions were being taken to protect him. Emma Peel remembered that Hopkirk of QQF had told her he's often had the task of planning several fantasy assassinations for the relief of tension of several of his clients. Steed and Mrs. Peel had looked at each other, and without saying a word, agreed it was time to pay another visit to Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk. They made good time to number 10 Beaver Street, but by the time they got into the Arabian room, Vincent had gone, and Hopkirk lay on the floor, dying.
Gently now, gently.
Fantastic. Quite fantastic.
Steed, look at this file on the table. QQF Fantasy number 3. Subject, the assassination of Crown Prince Ali of Bahrain. And the file is empty.
Hopkirk.
No good.
Hopkirk, this fantasy, the murder of Prince Ali. Now, when's it to take place?
Tomorrow. Tomorrow night.
But how, Hopkirk? How? I've got to stop it. Tell me how.
It's too late. Plan's been taken. It's already underway. It's too late to stop it now. Just too late.
Back in Steed's apartment, Steed mixed a hefty drink. You're getting as bad as Mother, Steed.
Cheers, Steed.
Cheers. Although at the moment there's really not much to cheer about, is there, Mrs. Peel? What are we going to do?
Well, why don't you just go to the Crown Prince and tell him there's going to be an attempt on his life tomorrow?
Oh, I can't do that.
Well, it seems simple enough.
Well, look what it says here in the newspaper. You know why he's come over here?
To sign over the oil concessions in our favour.
Exactly. In return for which we will give his country full military protection.
Well?
Well, what faith will he have in our military protection if we admit that we can't protect him, one man, right here in our own country?
Oh, point taken, Steed.
It could ruin the whole deal. He'd take his business elsewhere. No, we'll have to be more subtle. Think something out.
I wonder what Hopkirk planned. Steed, do you think the killer will use a gun?
A gun, a knife. Yes, remember that ornamental dagger? It does all seem to fit in.
Or poison.
Why poison?
Well, I was thinking about those wretched jars of honey. They've got to fit in somewhere, too. They're important somehow.
Well, whatever method the would-be murderer employs, he's got to get close enough to use it.
And one thing's certain. Prince Ali won't step outside the embassy once he's in there.
I agree. That means the killer's got to be smuggled in. Well, that's it, the major difficulty. He has got to get into the embassy somehow. And so have I.
The reception hall of the Bahrainian embassy is large, opulent, and beautifully furnished in a Middle Eastern style. A gong crashed out. Along the corridor hurried a large man wearing traditional Arab robes. He approached a dais in the hall and prostrated himself on a large cushion.
I crave pardon for this intrusion, Your Majesty.
What is it, Grand Vizier?
An Effendi from the British government, most high and gracious one. He begs to be admitted to your most high, illustrious presence.
Is he to be trusted?
His credentials have been checked once, twice, thrice times over, O High One. His person has been searched for offensive weapons. I, who am only a speck upon the camel's back, a lowly, ignorant toad in all-seeing eyes, think he can be trusted.
Then admit him.
At once, Master of Wisdom, with all speed.
The Vizier waddled out and whispered to John Steed.
You enter with the head bowed. Do not speak until His Highness addresses you. Advance with the head bowed.
Steed nodded and was ushered into the presence.
Effendi Steed, Your Majesty.
Now, what is your business, Mr. Steed?
A social call, Your Highness. I'm with the Ministry of Eastern Affairs. We merely wish to ensure that Your Majesty is enjoying his stay in this country.
Thank you. You may gaze upon the royal features.
Steed raised his head and looked at an extremely nice-looking young fellow of 30, boyishly handsome, dressed in flowing robes and traditional headcloth.
On behalf of my peoples and my country, I, Ali Belshazzar Moham Gabar, Crown Prince of Bahrain, defender of the faith, soother of all souls, lighter of dark corners, maker of men's destiny, fountain of wisdom, welcome thee. Vizier, you may retire.
Yes, so great one.
The Vizier backed carefully through the curtains. The Prince got up from the dais and said,
That's got rid of him, thank heavens. Do you play cricket, Mr. Steed?
Oh, well, yes, I do, but...
Bowler or batsman?
Well, a bit of an all-rounder, Your Majesty.
Oh,
but...
jolly good.
The prince tossed aside his traditional robes and appeared dressed as an ordinary young Englishman in white slacks and an open-neck shirt.
Henry,
Your Highness.
The guard at the door snapped to attention.
set up the wicket and get over to the far door to keep an eye out for the jolly old Grand Vizier. He's one of the old school, you know, Mr. Steed. Bit of a stickler for tradition.
The prince reached behind the throne and produced a cricket bat and ball.
Harold, Herbert, take up fielding positions.
2 guards leapt forward at the command. The prince tossed the ball to Steed and took his place at the wicket.
Right. Send him down good and fast, Steed. Come on, that's a royal command from the Fountain of Wisdom and all that stuff.
Oh, very well, Your Highness.
Steed shrugged his shoulders, paced away to the end of the hall, and started to bowl.
That's the style. Keep 'em coming, keep 'em coming.
While Steed was playing cricket with the Crown Prince, Mr. Arkadi, the curiously healthy Turkish gentleman, was in the health centre again. He was lying on a slab under a sunray lamp and wearing nothing but dark glasses. Vincent entered.
I have been reading the QQF's plan. I have no doubt that if we follow the instructions as laid down, you will penetrate the security of the Bahrainian embassy, and it will all work out very smoothly. Hopkirk certainly knows his business.
Knew his business?
Quite. As you say, knew. Are you ready to go?
Yes, Mr. Arkady. I've overlooked nothing, except the payoff.
Arkady regarded him distastefully through his dark glasses and picked up a towel. He unrolled it and revealed a pile of notes. Vincent picked up the pile eagerly, then reacted amazed. The notes had been neatly cut in halves. Arkady gently retained one half with an elegant finger.
A half now, and the other half when the job is done. Those were the agreed terms.
Yes, but when you said half, I thought you meant... I expected half the amount.
We must try to trust one another, my dear Vincent. We really must. Now, take your time about the job. A sure aim. And one nice big bang.
John Steed had to admit that Prince Ali was a far better batsman than he was a bowler.
Yeah, I think a break for tea is clearly indicated. You would like some tea, Mr. Steed?
Oh, thank you, Your Highness. Yes, I would.
You summoned, oh great and high one.
I certainly did. Tea, Vizier, for myself and my guests.
Instantly, Your Highness.
The Vizier clapped his fleshy hands, and instantly the curtains parted. 2 heavily veiled harem girls appeared through the drapes, carrying trays of tea and various things to eat.
Well, I've heard of instant refreshments, but that really is service.
Oh, we don't stand any laxity, you know, Steed. These are a couple of my wives, by the way.
Oh,
number 4 and number... let's take a closer look at... number 33. Charming girl. Cost me a bag of salt and 4 goats. I got lots more out the bag.
Goats?
Wives. Matter of status, you see, having a lot of them. Vizier, how many wives at the last count?
239, Your Mighty One.
I should think you would have to be mighty, too, with that lot.
I see your eyes flashing at the prospect, Mr. Steed, But did you stop to consider that a man with 239 wives also acquires 239 mothers-in-law,
That's a very sobering thought.
Well, then, here are hot scones. What would you like with them? A little goat's cream? Papyrus jelly?
You haven't had any honey, have you?
Honey? I loathe the stuff. Vizier, honey for Mr. Steed, and make sure you taste everything on the trays before we eat. I'm sorry to insist on this, Mr. Steed, but you see, so many people want to kill me. Would you believe that?
Now...
The Grand Vizier clapped his fleshy hands, and instantly the curtains parted. 2 heavily veiled harem girls appeared through the drapes, carrying trays of tea and various things to eat.
Now, that really is service.
Oh, we don't stand any laxity here, Mr. Steed. These are a couple of my wives, by the way. Number 4 and number 33. Oh, number 33 is a charming girl. Cost me a bag of salt and 4 goats. Vizier, how many wives at the last count?
239, your mighty one.
I see your eyes flash at the prospect, Steed, eh? But remember, that means 239 mothers-in-law also.
A very sobering thought.
Ah. Well, now, tea. Here are hot scones. What would you like with them?
You haven't any honey, have you?
Honey? Loathe the stuff. Vizier, honey for Mr. Steed. And make sure that you taste everything on the trays before we eat. Sorry to insist on this, Mr. Steed, but you see, there are so many people who want to kill me. Would you believe it?
Episode 6 of this story, in which John Steed gets Emma Peel into the Bahrainian embassy, where she becomes very much involved in the intricacies of the fantasy game. John Steed had managed to obtain the necessary credentials to get him into the Bahrainian embassy. There, the atmosphere of strictly orthodox Arabian behavior had been shattered when Crown Prince Ali, a personable young man with an English accent, had insisted on playing cricket in the large reception hall. Steed was finding the visit extremely pleasant, and when tea was served, he noted that the security precautions covered death by poisoning.
Right, Vizier. I shall have a little of that, 2 of those, a cup of lemon tea, and some gooseberry jam on one of the hot scones.
Yes, your highness.
Well, hurry up and taste the lot.
Immediately, O great and powerful one.
The great and powerful one is also the hungry one.
Steed watched with interest as the Grand Vizier moved round the trays, sipping tea and crunching biscuits, sucking a spoonful of gooseberry jam.
No discomfort?
None, your majesty.
Not even the slightest twinge?
No, O gracious one. The food is pure enough for the devourer of evil to consume.
The devourer of evil has no wish to devour evil. That's the whole point of the exercise. The Grand Vizier tastes everything for me, Mr. Steed.
So I observe.
There's always some nut trying to pop me off. Have to be extremely careful. Why, only last year we discovered that 2 of my cooks were members of the Pale Mauve May movement.
Oh, indeed. What steps did you take?
Oh, I liberated them for good. But come, Mr. Steed, what about you? Tea?
Thank you, yes. 2 lumps.
But you haven't got your honey.
Well, it really isn't important. I think I prefer the gooseberry jam. Please don't bother. This looks fine. You say you loathe honey, Your Highness.
Oh, can't bear it. Never touch it. Far too sweet for my taste. My wives, though, they love it. All of them.
Ah, is that so?
Yes. No idea how much they eat. 239 tummies to fill is a devil of a lot. I've had to order loads of honey while I'm here.
Ah, and you order best British honey, of course.
Of course.
From B. Bumble and Company, of course?
Of course. Yes, that's right. 40 jars of the stuff. A whole truckload.
I see. 40 jars? 1 truckload?
Oh, they weren't small jars like the gooseberry jam. They were special. Prince-sized jars. More like the ones round the walls.
The prince indicated with a wave of his hand an enormous Ali Baba-type jar standing in the corner.
40 man-sized jars. May I see them?
Impossible. They're all in there.
Again, the prince gestured with an elegant wave of his hand, this time towards a draped doorway flanked by burly guards. Steed got to his feet.
Well, surely your Highness won't mind if I have a quick look.
But as Steed moved forward, the 2 guards at the entrance jumped to attention and slammed their scimitars across the doorway, barring the entrance.
You can't go in there, Steed. No man can, except me. That is my harem.
Shortly after this, Steed admitted defeat and went home. Mrs. Peel was waiting for him. He outlined his ideas to her.
Well, it's clear enough, Mrs. Peel. It's the old Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves plot again. It's a typical Ponsonby Hopkirk fantasy. He was always kinky about the Arabian Nights. This one's right up his street.
Could be.
I'm sure of it.
Well, what do we do now?
Well, I bought you a present. Would you like to try it on?
Steed reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an Eastern yashmak. He held it over the lower half of Mrs. Peel's face.
Yes. Oh, it suits you.
No, Steed.
Brings out the colour of your eyes.
I said no.
But, Mrs. Peel, only a woman has any hope of getting into the prince's harem.
I absolutely and positively refuse.
Now, look, that's where the killer is hiding, I'm sure of it. It's the QQF-suggested fantasy plot. The assassin is concealed in one of those 40 jars. The rest are all honey, but one has a killer concealed in it. Now, look, I can't get in there, and you can.
No, Steed. I'm not joining anyone's harem.
The prince is quite good-looking, young, attractive, and rich.
I don't care if he's Paul Newman. The answer's still no.
Well, but if Prince Ali is murdered and you have to go through the rest of your life thinking, if only I'd agreed to help.
Now, see, that's not fair. That's blackmail, and I... All right. Tell me the worst.
Well, the prince has invited me to dinner tonight.
And you are taking another guest along?
Well, not a guest, exactly. Tell me, Mrs. Peel, what size do you take in puff trousers?
Later that day, in the health centre, Arkadi, the Turk, had finished bathing and was dressing for dinner. His manservant was helping him into a large corset, lacing it around Arkadi's middle.
Oh, no. The last lace hole. Try now.
Yes, sir. I not wish to hurt you.
When I say go, go. Oh, there is it. Oh, that is very good.
Very good. Very slim. Very beautiful.
Thank you. I think so, too. Yeah, the cummerbund.
The pistol in the cummerbund, sir.
No, I regret. I will be unable to smuggle it in. The search will be rigorous. That's it. Now, the coat?
Yes, sir.
That is good. I must hurry now. It will not do to be late for the prince's dinner party. His first dinner party. And his last. Vincent will see to that. Yes, it should be quite a night. Quite a night.
The reception hall at the Bahrainian embassy had been prepared for a sumptuous feast. The prince, clad in resplendent ceremonial robes, was seated on a cushion at the head of the feast. John Steed, in black tie, was seated next to him. The Grand Vizier was kept busy introducing the guests.
Well, I'm extremely flattered to be asked to your dinner party and be allowed such a place of honor, Your Highness.
It's my pleasure, old boy. I haven't met anyone in this country who bowls leg breaks as well as you do. These things are important, you know.
Don't you think so? Has the Grand Vizier tasted all this food?
Well, of course.
No wonder he's putting on weight.
Allow me to offer you this delicacy. Mountain rat's tails in aspic.
Well, actually, I'm trying to give them up, but habit forming.
Your Highness, you may be allowed to present my compliments.
Arkadi, nice to see you again.
Oh, it was most gracious of you to invite me, sir. I trust your Highness is in excellent health.
Indeed I am. Oh, Mr. Steed, may I present Mr. Arkadi?
Mr. Steed, I'm delighted to know.
Mr. Steed is a rival of yours, Arkadi. He's from the British government.
Oh, then congratulations. You beat us to it.
Oh?
The oil concessions.
My country hoped to obtain them in exchange for our military protection.
Oh, I understand. Your Highness, as this feast seems to have satisfied the inner man, might I be allowed to provide a little entertainment to follow it?
Oh, by all means, Mr. Steed. Be seated, Arkadi. Continue, Mr. Steed.
Thank you. Very well.
Steed rose and made a gesture to one of the guards, who struck the gong.
Your Highness, with your permission, may I present to you and your guests the Star of the East, Emma.
The curtains parted, and Mrs. Peel, heavily veiled and dressed as a harem dancer, snaked into the room to the accompaniment of suitable music. The prince leaned forward with interest as Mrs. Peel began to dance, removing one veil after another. After 4 down and 3 to go, Steed muttered,
Not bad, Mrs. Peel.
Not bad? She's splendid. I am pleased. Well pleased.
The prince leaned forward and licked his lips as the dance ended.
6 veils. I counted only 6 veils. There's still one more.
Well, she was poorly educated, alas, she cannot count.
I would speak to this woman.
Oh, certainly. Emma, over here, please.
Yes, master.
I know what you're saying. We don't want to offend the offensive.
Mrs. Peel stepped forward. The prince gestured to his side. Mrs. Peel sat down between him and Steed.
A shy one, eh? Not much to say.
Retarded. Definitely retarded.
Mrs. Peel shot Steed a look over her yashmak that made the death of 1,000 knives appear a compliment.
I offer 12 goats for this woman. It's a great deal to offer, but I have taken a fancy to her. I will buy her from you.
But Your Highness, I couldn't possibly. I mean...
It seems, Your Highness, that the British have no respect for your wishes. Now, if it were my government that were so requested...
I was about to say that I couldn't possibly accept anything. No, goats, not even the smallest nanny. If you like her, she's yours. I give her to you. You can put her into your harem at any time.
Steed is a 5-letter word.
Now, the applause that rang through the reception room of the Bahrainian embassy was for Mrs. Peel, who had just completed the dance of the 7 veils for the Crown Prince, Ali. Well, she'd completed as much of it as she was going to.
6 veils? I only counted 6 veils. There's still one more.
She was poorly educated, Your Highness. Alas, she cannot count.
I would speak to this woman.
Oh, certainly. Emma! Over here, please.
Yes, Master.
What you say, we don't want to offend the offended.
Mrs. Peel stepped forward, and in response to the prince's gesture, sank onto a cushion. There was an awkward silence.
She is a shy one. Not much to say.
Retarded. Definitely retarded.
But I've taken a great fancy to her. I will buy her from you. I offer 12 goats for this woman.
Oh, but Your Highness, I couldn't possibly. I mean...
It seems, Your Highness, that the British have no respect for your wishes. Now, if it were my government that were so requested...
I was about to say that I couldn't possibly accept anything. No goats, no, not a thing. No, if you like her, she's yours. I give her to you. You can put her into your harem at any time.
It is agreed, then. Vizier?
Oh, great one, I am here.
Take her. Go with him, woman. I shall be along later.
Episode 7, the final episode of this story, in which John Steed and Emma Peel manage to arrange an effective, if rather noisy, end to the fantasy game. John Steed had discovered the method to be used in the attempt upon the life of Crown Prince Ali of Bahrain. The late Mr. Ponsonby Hopkirk of QQF Inc. had worked it all out. The plan was based on the famous story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. The killer was to be smuggled into the Bahrainian embassy in a large honey jar. 40 of these jars had been delivered and deposited in the prince's harem. One of them contained the assassin. As no man other than the prince was allowed into the harem, Steed had coerced and tricked Mrs. Peel into joining the prince's 130-odd wives. Mrs. Peel, thrust through the door of the harem, wasn't very pleased with John Steed.
If I ever get my talons on Steed, he's going to have scars to show for quite some time. So this is how they do it, do they?
Mrs. Peel walked down what was virtually a corridor of little draped cubicles. Above these cubicles were small, tastefully engraved plaques.
Sharon? Mona? Ruth? Oh, dear. All we need to come across now is a duty roster.
Mrs. Peel walked the length of the corridor, and opening another small door, found herself in a large storeroom.
Storeroom. This is more like it. Large ornamental jars.
Approaching the jars cautiously, Mrs. Peel inspected them.
Bumble's best honey keeps your strength up. Well, let's see what it contains. Honey, all right. Well, if there's a man hidden in there, I don't fancy his chances. 1 down, 39 to go.
the main reception hall, the dinner party was over. The guests had left, and only John Steed and Arkadi were seated on cushions near the prince. Steed was working hard.
Oh, very amusing, Mr. Steed. Very amusing, old boy.
Another drink, Your Highness, and please tell me more about your camels.
I fear we are detaining, Your Highness. Your Highness must be extremely tired. Your first reception, you must be anxious to retire.
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact,
Come, the evening is young, and all this is so entertaining.
There is entertainment and entertainment, Steed, eh?
Yes, well, before we take our leave, may I be allowed to offer Your Highness a small gift?
Steed produced a small portable tape recording machine and placed it next to the prince.
Just press the button, Your Highness.
Oh, like this?
Strokes it into the covers, and Carew feels there's no run.
Oh, cricket!
216 for 5, 80 runs behind. And Gibbs again into bowl to close.
It's a full commentary of the last test match.
That is kind, most kind. We are pleased to accept, Mr. Steed. Do you play cricket, Mr. Arkadi?
No, alas, no, I don't.
Oh, it's the most pleasant of games.
Actually, this is a double tape. You press this button on the other side and it plays the second track, like this. It's specially recorded for you, Your Highness.
Oh, very nice. Makes me quite homesick.
But you carry your home with you wherever you go, Your Highness. Your whole entourage awaits you.
Oh, yes, you are right, Arkadi.
The prince switched off the recorder and yawned once again.
Oh, I fear you're right, Arkadi. I am rather tired.
In that case, we ask permission to withdraw.
Yes, I think I'll cut along now.
But this excellent liqueur isn't half finished yet.
Oh, no need for you to rush off. The two of you can stay and get better acquainted. It's been a very pleasant evening. Thanks.
The prince made for the door of his harem. Steed moved after him.
But Your Majesty,
Stay! The prince disappeared inside, the door closed, the guards barred Steed's way with crossed scimitars. You're on your own now, Mrs. Peel. At that particular moment, Mrs. Peel, having worked her way through inspecting half the stone jars, was searching yet another.
Empty. So Steed was right. Let's see. Yes, breathing holes drilled into the earthenware. So the killer is in the harem. Loose. In here at the moment, but where?
Emma, little star of the east.
Oh, no. Now for it.
Your prince is here.
If the assassin's waiting, he couldn't be given a better chance.
Prince is waiting for his Emma. Princey Wincy's coming to get you.
Princey Wincy'll get a thick ear if he tries anything on.
Mrs. Peel ducked into one of the cubicles, one that bore the name Miffy, number 238. The harem girl lay back on a lace coverlet. She was bound and gagged.
So he's around here somewhere.
Emma, my patience is running thin. Show yourself, woman. That is a command.
Mrs. Peel stepped out into the corridor.
Emma, my eastern star.
The prince held out his arms. Mrs. Peel, looking beyond him, saw an arm stretched out from the drapes of another cubicle. She rushed forward, knocking the prince flying. Mrs. Peel grabbed at the gun arm and yanked Vincent out into the corridor like a ball from a cannon. She hurled him into the stone jars. Mrs. Peel, following through, rushing after Vincent. The prince picked himself up and watched in horrified amazement as Vincent snatched a scimitar from the wall.
Right. It's about time I settle things with you, once and for all.
Vincent advanced on the helpless Mrs. Peel. Mrs. Peel kicked a honey jar over and rolled it at him. It tripped Vincent and gave Mrs. Peel time to snatch another scimitar from the wall. They fought. The prince winced as Vincent slashed out at Mrs. Peel. Mrs. Peel sidestepped and gave a powerful sweep with her scimitar. It crashed into Vincent's, knocking it from his hand. Mrs. Peel stepped forward and, placing the point of her sword at Vincent's throat, forced him back against the stone wall.
Right. Start talking. Who's behind all this? Come on, talk.
It was Arkady. Arkady's idea. Arkady's the man you want.
Say that louder. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Come on.
Steed and Arkady were still in the reception room. They'd heard the terrific noise from within the harem, and then the voice.
It was Arkady! Arkady's the man you want! He planned to kill the prince, I'll prove it!
Steed looked at Arkady, who made for the exit. Steed grabbed him.
No, you don't.
Steed got hold of Arkady's evening jacket by the sleeves. Arkady merely slipped out of the coat and legged it for the exit just as Mrs. Peel, having stopped only to lay out Vincent with the flat of her scimitar, appeared from the harem.
Steed? Steed, where's Arkady?
Gone. There's no great rush. I know where to find him. Look at this appointment slip in his pocket. Read it.
QQF Inc., Fantasy number 4, subject, escape of Arkady from pursuing agents. Come on.
My friend, I don't know what this is all about, but clearly you have saved my life. Anything I have is yours. My jewels, my horses.
No, really.
My favourite wife.
Oh, well, in that case...
Oh, come on, Steed. You can't have me and a favourite wife.
In the QQF, Arkady ransacked the drawers of the desks and searched all the filing cabinets, spilling papers all over the place. Eventually, he found what he was looking for.
A forged passport and an airplane ticket just in time.
Just too late.
What?
Arkady swung round, gun at the ready, but Mrs. Peel, who was standing quite close, holding the trick Aladdin's lamp, merely smiled sweetly and gave the lamp a rub. Arkady recoiled with surprise, and through the smoke haze, John Steed appeared with his umbrella. He swung it up quite high and brought it down on the back of Arkady's neck.
Nicely timed, Steed. You were...
Mrs. Peel broke off, peered through the haze. Steed had disappeared. Mrs. Peel looked down at the floor. There was a pause. And then the sound of Steed's umbrella banging beneath.
Quite fantastic.
Some days later, sitting on the carpet in Steed's apartment.
Well, Prince Ali signed the oil treaty.
It's amazing. After all, we didn't succeed in keeping the murder attempt from him, did we?
Yes, the top brass weren't too pleased about it, actually. We got a firm lecture.
Oh, well. It was bound to happen someday. I always knew we'd end up on the carpet.
Ah, but if you're with me, it's always a magic carpet, Mrs. Peel. Goat's milk or champagne?
The Avengers.
Listen every evening, Monday to Friday, to John Steed and Emma Peel, The Avengers.